A while back I uploaded a video where I installed two Auxbeam pod lights to the front of my van using some bonnet adapter brackets. And then the guys at Auxbeam decided to reach out and say, hey, do you fancy some more lights? To which I responded, yeah. But the challenge of adding more lights is that it means more cables, more relays, more wiring. I didn't really want to do that. So one of the ways around that is with a controller. And that's when the guys at Auxbeam said, we can make it happen. So in today's video, we are going to be installing this. Now this is the Auxbeam 6-way LED light controller. I'm gonna go through all the ins and outs of what this controller actually does. I'm gonna show you how to install it to your vehicle. And I'm also going to show you the existing wiring of the two pod lights that I've got on the front of our van. That whilst Auxbeam have sent me this controller and some more lights to install to my camper van, this is a modification that I have been wanting to do myself, and I did do my research beforehand. I wouldn't be putting out this video if I genuinely didn't think that it would be useful for you guys, my viewers. I'm not being paid to give this product a review or anything like that. They've just sent it to me asking if I can install it to my van. But if you've got any questions about the products that you see in this video, please drop a comment below and I will do my best to answer them. And if you haven't already, please like, please subscribe, please click that little bell that gives you a notification when I upload a new video. We've got loads more content coming very soon. Right, let's get on with the install. So these are the original lights that I installed. These are the Auxbeam X Pro dual DRLs. So there's a little DRL that comes on with the headlights, and then there's a switch inside the van that illuminates them to full like fog light brightness, and they are bright. And I've mounted them using the Mule Van's bonnet brackets, which are designed for the VW Crafter, second generation. As you can see, it's pretty tidy. The only thing I had to do, because there's a slight angle on these, I just had to modify the hinge slightly just to tilt the light to make sure it's parallel with the van. This cable comes down from the light, you can see in the reflection there, and it runs down through this flange, and then there's separate cables, a yellow one and a white one, of which I think it's the yellow one, which I wired into the back of the headlight, which then switches on the DRL light. So when the main beams are on, or I've put the position lights on, there's a signal that goes up and turns on the DRL on the pod lights. Now the main power runs up through this cable here, and I've basically fed it all the way around back of the firewall and then over to here, where, and there's another cable here runs down, and I've fed it into this relay. So in the VW Crafter, this is like a positive connection point, and then we've got a ground connection point just there. Normally in most vehicles there would be like an auxiliary battery. In the Crafter, this was an optional extra. The actual auxiliary battery sits in the passenger footwell underneath the seat. But you can see here, I've got the positive cable coming out, we've got an inline fuse, and that runs into this relay, and then we've got a ground point there. So that's your positive and your negatives. And then from the relay, there's then a separate switch cable which goes out the back and through that rubber grommet out there, which takes through the firewall into the passenger footwell, and then over to the driver's side where there's a switch, which you can see right there. So that's the switch for the lights, but it's not a pretty install and it could definitely be done better, and that is why I want to add a controller. Look at that. See a bit better now. So this is the controller unit that we are going to be installing under the bonnet of the van. So inside we've got a series of connection points, up to 6 different lights with various different fuse ratings, and then we've got a positive and a negative main connection terminal point which will come from the auxiliary battery. We've got a accessory point, which is effectively, this is like the ignition cable would come into here, and then we've got a controller point here which will then be just one wire going out to the controller in the cab, and then this will send a signal into this controller when the ignition is active, and this is always permanently wired to a 12-volt source. The advantage with this controller is built in above here is 6 solid state relays, which basically removes or negates the need to have the relay that comes with the lights. The lights are perfectly fine if you just want to buy a single pod of lights and just wire them in, but as soon as you're starting adding more components, more lights to your vehicle, that's where this comes into play. It's quite a satisfying click. We get the accessory cable, which is what's required to send the ignition signal to the controller. We get a little bag of piggyback fuses, which we'll use for the accessory cable. So my plan is to feed it through the firewall and then tap into one of the fuses underneath the passenger seat, because I know there are ignition points there. Get a little bag of bolts and screws and Allen keys and stuff. I've got a 60 amp circuit breaker, and that will sit in between positive power coming from the auxiliary battery and the controller as a final measure. We get 3 cables, 2 positive, 1 negative, and that is to power the controller. This is 10mm squared stuff, so pretty heavy duty. The controller itself is rated to 720 watts. Each pod light is, I believe, 40 watts each. So even if I added 12 lights, we're still well with under that 720. Got some zip ties. I like it when zip ties are included to make the installation nice and neat. And then finally, we have the control panel. So as I said earlier, this is a 6-way control panel, and you can customize what each of these switches does. So depending on which one you wire to, so you wire number 1 to number 1 on the controller, and then you can decide what light that actually controls. You've got a power button and you've got a mode button, so you can do some other stuff which I will show later, such as different modes, so you can set the lights to pulse or modulate or just be on. There's some other cool features such as memory, so this controller will remember what your last settings were. So when you turn the van back on, it will remember all your settings, and then you can just press on, it will illuminate all the lights that you had on previously. And then finally, there's a waterproof cover. I'm guessing if you're going to be going into some very deep water, you might want to add that. You also get a bracket to mount the controller, or you can use a 3M sticky pad. I'm going to be using the bracket, I think. I haven't quite decided exactly where I'm going to be installing it in the cab, so work in progress on that one. And then these are all the different labels that you can stick onto your controllers. So there's all sorts of things, from side, hood, windshield, driver, camera, fish box, underglow, rock. Yeah, there's all sorts of different indicators that you can use for your lights. So the first thing we need to do is disconnect the fuse for the current pod light and then cut off the relay, so we're just left with the positive and negative cables to the lights, and then I can then install the controller, feed the cable, feed the auxiliary, and wire it all up. Sounds pretty simple. Let's get to it. And then the van build gods decided to unleash rain. Joy. So this is the original relay for the pod lights, and the 2 power cables are these 2. So I need to cut them off, and then the relay, the fuse, and the cable to the switch in the cab can all be discarded. One thing I didn't actually realise that was in the box was this bracket, which conveniently you can mount the control panel to, and then I can easily mount this into the van, and it allows a little recess to feed your cables up and into each of the ports for the lights. So yeah, nice touch from Auxbeam on that one. The other thing I've done, so we've now got the circuit breaker wired up, and this one, the short one's going to go straight to the auxiliary battery. The long one is going to go straight into the control panel. I'm not going to mess around with shortening these cables. I could do, but I'm just going to keep it simple for the moment. Obviously with the rain, I'm starting to run out of time now as well. So yeah, as you can see, that bracket fits neatly on there. And there's a bolt hole conveniently already there as well. Thank you very much, VW and Auxbeam. And then on this side, once this bolts in, on this side I might just zip tie it around, but it'll be solid. It's not going anywhere. So as you can see here, I've extended the accessory cable, so that now goes through the firewall, and I'm going to tap that in a minute. But these cables can just literally run round. My negative terminal can go there. I've also, so the two pod lights on the front, I've joined them together into one cable, and then that can then easily be wired in to the appropriate port. One of these. I have decided I am going to cut this because I want this terminal to be a bit smaller, so it fits on this mount here. Okay, what I've got here, so this is the passenger seat. I've just lifted up the swivel base, and I've been using my voltmeter to find an appropriate fuse to tap into. Now I know already just from previous checks, because I've piggybacked for my DC charger, that this middle bank only becomes activated when the ignition is on, and there was a spare socket there, and I've just checked it, and yeah, it goes to 12 volts when the ignition is in, and then it switches to 0 and the key's out. So that is where I'm going to piggyback this. It's not really a piggyback, I'm literally just putting in the fuse and then tap that in for the accessory cable. So in the passenger footwell we have this cable, which is the accessory cable, and I've just covered it in conduit, and that will feed underneath the floor, under there, and then up into here. Add the piggyback and happy days. So then, we've now got our accessory cable wired in, we've got our front pods wired into number 3, I've also connected the control cable, we've got our positive and our negative 12 volt cables, and then we've got the circuit breaker here. So the piggyback is all in, and we're taking our main power line from here. So when I flip this circuit breaker, I've just wired this up temporarily, this should illuminate and we should have lights. So let's flip that, and boom, there is our controller. So I've wired this into number 3, so if I press 3, that now indicates that the lights are on. And guess what? They are. Cool. So now what we've got to do is mount this through the cab. Just a quick note on the piggyback. I said that I was going to put it into that empty slot. I ended up actually having to put it on the end one and then put the spare fuse in. I realised that it does need to piggyback, otherwise the circuit can't continue through. So you can't really see it, but there are 2 fuses in that, so that's now piggybacked off the central bank on this VW Crafter. It'll be different for different vehicles, so do check that you've got an ignition live when the key is in. So what I've done is I've mounted the control panel to this OEM switch panel, which goes down where the lights are, just down here on the driver's side, just so it's all in the same place as the normal main lights and position lights. Just makes it easier just to switch everything from down there. So that should just clip straight into place. Then I just got to feed the cable down underneath there, back through the dash, under the feet, and then to there. And there we go, it's installed in place. So basically, until the key is in the ignition, this is inactive. And just to recap on this, so it's all wired in now, circuit breaker is on, it's all wired up. We've got the plastic cover on, back on the power unit. We can put the cover on this. That is solid right there, but it means that any new lights I can just wire straight through the firewall into the back there, connect it up, and there's no other faffing around with relays and all that kind of stuff. So let's go test it out. So one of the cool things you can do here is you can change the colour to anything you like. There we go. So it's gone yellow, red, pink. Just keep holding it until it cycles through all the different colours, so you can customise the backlight to whatever you want it to be. I think I'm going to go with maybe a nice sort of purpley blue, something like that. That's pretty good. So if you don't want the backlight on, you just press mode, that'll turn it off. You can press on, mode on, or mode on, and then yeah, you can toggle your lights. Obviously these two aren't wired into anything, but there's a little bit of insight into future plans. The other thing you can do is change whether you want to be like momentary, pulsed, on or switched. So if you double tap mode and then select the light you want, blue or green does different things, or red is just press on and it stays on. If I switch to blue and press mode and then press blue, basically it will only stay on when your finger's actually on the light. If we press it to pulsed, which is green, basically does that, which is pretty cool, but only if you want an epileptic fit. Let's just go back to standard on or off. Take the ignition out and it all turns off. So there we go, that is the install of the 6-way controller from Auxbeam. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, please subscribe, please watch out for the next video. Please hit that little bell button, because in the next video I'm going to be installing 4 additional pod lights on the back of the van, which is very exciting and will give us a lot more opportunity to do more wild camping and be able to park up securely, and give us a lot more floodlights when we're loading and unloading the van and all that kind of stuff at night. If you've got any questions about this install or anything to do with the van build, please drop a comment below and I'll do my best to answer them. Thank you very much. We'll see you on the next one. Boom.